If you want a comprehensive series of in-depth astrology information in an audiobook format, check out the 4-part Elements series by Stephen Forrest. I had the privilege of narrating it to audiobook, and it's a must for any astrology library. His complete life's work in a 4-volume set. The Book of Fire, Earth, Air, and Water. Direct links to all 4 books are on hightimelinebooks.com or available on Audible and Apple Books. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller and Robert Glasscock. We have a guy with a generational question. And Robert.
Yes?
I'm so glad this is a guy. We got a dude.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, we got a dude in here with a question. So you ladies, he's got a good one too.
Hi, Thomas and Robert. As I've been watching the upcoming transits to my natal chart, I've noticed that the upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction on the Pisces-Aries cusp is happening directly opposite the Virgo-Libra cusp, where most people born in 1980 and 81 have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in their natal chart. Mine also has Venus as a 3-way conjunction with them. Do you have any analysis for how this transit will affect pretty much everyone in their mid-40s? I love your work, and thanks for everything you guys do.
So, Robert, this is great because he is asking about basically the millennial generation, because the millennials begin around 1980. And we've got a chart in the show notes that you guys should call up because we're going to be referencing this. And it is set to a random date, May 22nd, 1981. That's the inner wheel on the chart that you're going to be looking at. And that has Jupiter and Saturn fairly close together. They are red numbers, which means in this chart program that they are in retrograde. And if you'll notice, they are right on the cusp of the ascendant, and then go over to the right at the cusp of the 7th house, and you'll see the magic date in 2026, February 13th, when Saturn and Neptune will both be at 0 degrees Aries. So I love what he's asking here, Robert. He's saying, how is this going to affect this whole generation that is in the middle of their timeline years now? The kids that we raised are now in the workplace, and then this big aspect is sitting right on top of a structure in their natal charts. So how is this going to affect our millennials?
Well, once again, I have to thank the listeners. You're not going to get a question like this on any other podcast. Steve, such a brilliant question. He's talking about a generation, born around 1980-81 with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction basically in Libra, ingressing into Libra, the sign of marriage. Also, the sign of the other, generally. When you want to study something like this, a generational configuration, what you do is place it on the first cusp so that you can then look at what else Steve asked about, which is today's upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, opposing that configuration of Jupiter-Saturn back in 1981. So now you can study it by looking at this combination of 2 wheels here. The generation that Steve was born into with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra is basically a generation that is going to redefine the ethics of marriage. Guess what? In 1980, that is when AIDS broke publicly, and the whole issue of same-sex marriage and gays and lesbians and AIDS burst forth with calamitous results for many, many people. But this generation and every generation since, we get up to today in 2026, and younger people are what are now being called gender fluid. So this is where all of that started. And with today's transit of Saturn and Neptune about to ingress into Aries of new beginnings and breakthroughs, all of this is coming to a head now. So and this is true around the world. And you look at things, for example, in the Middle East, where women and women's rights are once again primary. Now, I believe the Taliban has told women that they are not allowed to speak in public. So they're still dealing with this same issue of the other in their own culture. So are we here. And the same thing about there are a lot of people who are still upset over the idea of two people of the same sex getting together. But this idea of this generation that Steve's born into, the ethics, Jupiter in Libra of marriage, is challenged by Saturn, which is the planet of growth and maturity. I call it the get real planet. So what's facing society today is the reality that the old traditional definitions of relationships are being challenged and redefined. People are today given more and more and more permission to love whoever they want, as long as it's legal. I'm not talking about child abuse here, but as long as it's legal, you can love and marry and live with and raise children with anybody that you love. This is a huge breakthrough. So this is what we're looking at. And when I'm talking about the other, which is Libra, it's not just marriage. It's every contract that we make, and this applies to the collective as well. So we are seeing now with transiting Saturn and Neptune's conjunction in Aries, a sign of war, by the way, Mars ruled, and Neptune, which rules, among other things, lies and deceptions. We're seeing this conflict between how our nation relates to the other. It's a worldwide conflict, basically, between democracy, equality for all, which is Libra, and authoritarianism, which is Aries, the conqueror, the me first. And we're seeing all of the lies and deceptions being perpetrated to try to sway voters toward one side or the other of this equation. And Thomas knows this from the workshops that I conducted at Kepler going back 5, 6, 7 years now, talking about the potential of world war. But that's the other, that's Aries, Libra, or in this case, Libra, Aries, because what Steve is focusing on is this generational conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter together in Libra. And Jupiter rules the laws. So these are the laws not only about love and marriage and who can be married and who can't, but also the international laws. Neptune rules foreign countries, the international community, in other words. So what we're being challenged today with these transits from Saturn conjoined Neptune is a whole redefinition and rebalancing of international relationships. And right now we've got this horrific situation in the Middle East, for example, which is basically all about religion, which is also ruled by Neptune and Jupiter, both in astrology, Pisces and Sag. So we've got religious warfares that are threatening world stability going on in the Middle East. We've got the same thing on a smaller scale in this country as old definitions of religions. And religions absolutely are tribal, and they're used to define us from them, us versus the other, very Aries Libra. Those two religions they're in a crisis now. The Catholic Church, for example, is losing, all religions are in this country, losing a lot of members because of these very things. And this millennial generation is challenging the old religious paradigm. So that's, in essence, what this huge configuration is about. And Steve's generation, born with that Jupiter-Saturn in Libra, they're on the forefront of this. They're now in their mid-40s. Now, on a personal level, with transiting Saturn and Neptune coming into Aries and opposing that, these people's marriages will also be undergoing a crisis of redefinition. It does not mean that they're going to all get divorced, but it does mean that they will redefine their marriages in the light of increased equality and mutual respect, as opposed to the old traditions about the man does this and the woman does that. Those old definitions are gradually dissolving, and they're no longer valid at all for the millennial generation and newer generations. They're very comfortable with all of this stuff that upsets people of older generations. They're totally comfortable with this. So that's in a nutshell what Steve's question is addressing. And thank you, Steve. What a question.
Boy, changes are coming, that is for sure. All 5 of the outer planets, from Jupiter to Pluto, are changing signs within about a 2-year period. It is going to be shake, rattle, and roll. Buckle your seatbelts and make sure you have a lot of popcorn on hand. Thank you guys so much for listening. Steve, thanks for a great question, and we'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.